On November 24, 1221, standing on the banks of the Indus River, in what is now Pakistan, a young man clad in heavy armor found himself caught between fatal defeat and inescapable demise. Behind him lay tens of thousands of slain soldiers, their bodies drenched in blood. Ahead, like an unstoppable torrent of steel and iron, advanced a cavalry of 5,000 Mongols, led by none other than Genghis Khan himself. The only thing separating him from certain death was the raging, almost 6-meter-deep waters of the Indus, a depth significantly greater than 2 stories of a building. His name was Jalal ad-Din Mangburni, the 20-year-old Sultan of the Khwarezmian Empire. Just a few months prior, he had achieved something that no other commander would have dared attempt. He had routed Genghis Khan, a figure widely considered invincible in battle. This feat was accomplished at the head of an army hastily assembled from refugees, farmers, and the survivors of his empire's collapse.
Yet now, all seemed lost. His family was captured, his forces scattered, and Genghis Khan had arrived personally to exact his revenge. What chain of events led to this? How did a small group of refugees manage to overcome the most formidable empire the world had ever known? And why couldn't that victory avert their ultimate tragedy? Today, we will delve into one of humanity's most poignant and, at the same time, inspiring narratives. A tale of hope, valor, and the steep price exacted when confronting the most merciless war machine of its era. But before we begin, I'd like to hear from you. From which country are you watching this video, and what time is it there? Vietnam, the United States, Europe, or another corner of the globe?
Please leave a comment below so we can grasp the global reach of our historical community. Now, allow me to transport you to an age when Central Asia thrived at the heart of civilizations, when the Silk Road brought unimaginable wealth to ancient cities, and when one man's ambitions reduced this paradise to ashes. This is more than just a war chronicle. It is an account of what transpires when ordinary individuals are compelled to become extraordinary. It is a story about the essence of resistance, even when resistance itself appears futile. And it is a reflection on a question that continues to echo through the centuries. Is it better to die standing in battle than to live on your knees? Stay with me until the very end, as the answer to this question will surprise you, and the lesson this story imparts is as pertinent today as it was 800 years ago. To comprehend this saga, we must return to 1219, when Central Asia remained one of the world's most flourishing regions. The Khwarezmian Empire was not an ancient kingdom. It had emerged only a few decades earlier when the rulers of Khwarezm capitalized on the decline of the Seljuk Empire to broaden their dominion. In the late 11th century, under the leadership of Shah Tekish, Khwarezm rapidly seized major cities such as Nishapur, Merv, and finally, in 1194, the Seljuk capital of Hamadan. This empire stretched from Hamadan in the west to Nishapur in the east, effectively controlling a significant portion of the Silk Road. Tekish's son, Shah Muhammad II, succeeded him in 1200 and continued the territorial expansion. By 1219, the empire encompassed the territories of modern-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of Kazakhstan. Its population was estimated at approximately 2 million people. However, it was a nascent empire plagued by numerous internal issues. Shah Muhammad distrusted most of his generals. His mother, the influential Queen Terken Khatun, still wielded enormous power and frequently meddled in political decisions, leading to conflicts within the court. Meanwhile, in the northeast, a new power was ascendant. In 1206, Temujin, or as we know him, Genghis Khan, united the Mongol tribes under a single banner. This was no ordinary unification. Genghis Khan forged a revolutionary military system. The army was no longer organized along tribal or familial lines, but into decimal units, 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 men, known as tumans. Every warrior was a mounted archer, trained from childhood, capable of precise shooting even at a full gallop. Mongol tactics relied on speed, mobility, and psychological warfare. They employed feigned retreats to lure enemies from their positions, then encircled and annihilated them. They also adopted a brutal policy. Any city that resisted faced complete extermination, serving as a warning to others. By 1218, the Mongols had subdued Western Xia and were threatening the Jin dynasty in China. The Mongol Empire now bordered Khwarezm. Initially, Genghis Khan sought to establish trade relations with Khwarezm. In 1218, he dispatched a trade caravan, comprising approximately 450 individuals with valuable goods, to the border city of Otrar. However, Inalchuk, the governor of Otrar, suspected the caravan members were spies. He ordered the arrest and execution of all caravan participants, confiscating all their goods. Though incensed, Genghis Khan first sought to resolve the conflict through diplomacy. He dispatched another embassy, demanding that Shah Muhammad punish Inalchuk and provide restitution. Rather than complying, Shah Muhammad ordered the chief envoy executed and the beards of the remaining ambassadors shaved before sending them back. This act was considered the ultimate insult in Mongol culture. Genghis Khan then convened a military council. According to historians, he spent 3 solitary days atop a hill, deep in thought and prayer, after which he declared, "I will go to utterly destroy Khwarezm." In the winter of 1219, Genghis Khan led his forces through the Tian Shan Mountains. Historians dispute the exact size of his army, with estimates ranging from 75,000 to 200,000 troops. A more probable figure is between 100,000 and 150,000, which included Chinese siege engineers. The army was divided into 4 divisions. His eldest son, Jochi, commanded troops moving northeast. His sons Chagatai and Ogadai laid siege to Otrar. Genghis Khan himself, alongside his younger son Tolui, led the main body of the army westward. Shah Muhammad faced a formidable dilemma. He possessed significantly larger forces, estimated at 400,000 men. However, these were garrison troops dispersed across his vast empire. He feared that if he concentrated his forces for a decisive, open-field battle, the Mongols would shatter them with their superior mobile tactics. Consequently, the Shah opted for a strategy of deep defense, stationing garrisons in major cities such as Otrar, Bukhara, Samarkand, and Gurganj. In theory, this was a logical approach, but it harbored one fatal flaw. The Mongols could sequentially focus overwhelming power on each city. And so it transpired. Otrar, the city where the war originated, became the initial target. Chagatai and Ogadai besieged the city with 50,000 warriors. Governor Inalchuk, the man responsible for the massacre of the trade caravan, commanded 20,000 defenders. The siege endured throughout the winter, and by February 1220, the walls were breached. Inalchuk retreated to the inner citadel, fighting until his last breath. Upon his capture, molten silver was poured into his ears and eyes, a symbolic retribution for the greed that sparked the war. While Otrar was still holding out, Genghis Khan, with his primary force, rapidly advanced westward. He bypassed Samarkand, contrary to expectations, and suddenly appeared before the gates of Bukhara. At that time, Bukhara was one of the most vital cultural and religious centers of the Islamic world. The city housed approximately 20,000 garrison troops. However, witnessing the sheer scale of the Mongol army, a large portion of the garrison attempted to break out and flee. Most were caught and slaughtered outside the city. The remaining elders and scholars opened the city gates, surrendering in hopes of averting disaster. Genghis Khan entered the city, proceeded to the great mosque, and, legend holds, declared, "I am the scourge of God, sent to punish you for your sins." The inhabitants were ordered to evacuate the city. The Mongol army then systematically plundered it. Libraries containing thousands of precious manuscripts were burned. Artisans were enslaved. The rest of the city was laid to waste. This established a pattern the Mongols would frequently repeat: capture a city, categorize the population, preserve skilled craftsmen, execute those who resisted, and demolish the city as a cautionary example. Following Bukhara, Genghis Khan advanced on Samarkand, the capital and largest city of Khwarezm, with a population of approximately 100,000. This city was defended by 110,000 warriors, including war elephants from India. Yet, Shah Muhammad was absent. Upon hearing of Bukhara's fall, he panicked and fled westward, abandoning both his capital and his army. This proved to be a catastrophic decision. When the soldiers learned their emperor had deserted, their morale completely collapsed. Genghis Khan besieged Samarkand with approximately 150,000 warriors. For the first time, he concentrated his entire army on a single objective. On the first day of the siege, 50,000 garrison troops attempted a breakout but were ambushed, and nearly all were killed. After only 5 days of siege, the city authorities surrendered. The populace was ordered to leave the city. The Mongol army carried out a systematic ransacking. Goldsmiths, masters of craft, blacksmiths, and architects were spared. The rest were dispersed. Some became slaves, others were forced to serve as human shields in subsequent attacks, and many were put to death. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad fled westward with his eldest son, Jalal al-Din, and a small guard. Genghis Khan dispatched 2 of his most accomplished generals, Jeb and Subutai, with 30,000 horsemen in pursuit. This became one of history's longest chases. Jeb and Subutai pursued the Shah through Nishapur, Tus, and Persian cities like Kazvin and Ardabil. Every city that refused to open its gates to the Shah was subsequently ravaged by the Mongols. Finally, in the winter of 1220, Shah Muhammad found refuge on a small island in the Caspian Sea, but he was utterly depleted, both physically and mentally. Just weeks later, he succumbed to dysentery on that island, alone and abandoned by everyone. Before his demise, he designated Jalal ad-Din as his successor, although by then, there was virtually no empire left to inherit. The former Khwarezmian capital, Gurganj, once hailed as the empire's wealthiest city, was defended by a 50,000-strong garrison under the command of the Queen Mother, Turkin Khatun. Genghis Khan tasked his sons, Jochi, Chagatai, and Ogadai, with seizing Gurganj, but discord plagued their efforts. Jochi and Chagatai ceaselessly bickered over strategy, necessitating Genghis Khan's intervention by sending Ogadai as a mediator. The siege stretched over 5 months, making it the longest engagement of the entire campaign. Gurganj possessed formidable fortifications and a high morale. However, in the spring of 1221, the Mongol army breached the dams, inundating a section of the city with the waters of the Amu Darya. Following the city's fall, the Mongols unleashed a horrific massacre. Fighting raged within the city for many days, with contemporary historians reporting hundreds of thousands dead, though this figure might be exaggerated. What is certain is that Gurganj was so thoroughly razed that its reconstruction took decades. While the 3 brothers besieged Gurganj, Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tului, was commanded to pacify the southern Khorasan region. Tului had approximately 7,000 regular Mongol troops at his disposal, but he augmented their numbers by coercing civilians from already conquered cities to join his army. This ruthless strategy involved employing residents of one city to attack another. Merv was the initial target, and at that time, it ranked among the world's largest cities, boasting a population between 100,000 and 200,000. Additionally, the city harbored tens of thousands of refugees from other areas. In April 1221, after a 6-day siege, Merv's governor surrendered on the condition that the lives of its inhabitants would be spared. Tului pledged to execute only the 12,000 garrison soldiers. Yet, as the people exited the city, the Mongol army encircled them and initiated a systematic slaughter. Each Mongol soldier was ordered to execute between 300 and 400 individuals. Many soldiers in Tolui's army were from Sarax, a city that had a deep-seated enmity with Merv. They butchered their fellow Muslims with a brutality that surpassed even that of the Mongols. The Arab historian Ibn al-Athir, drawing upon survivor accounts, estimated Merv's death toll at 700,000. However, this figure was undoubtedly overstated, as the city could not have housed so many inhabitants. Nevertheless, even if the actual number were merely 100,000 or 200,000, it still constituted one of the largest massacres of its era. Nishapur followed. This city initially submitted, but later rebelled against Mongol dominance. In retaliation, and because Genghis Khan's son-in-law, Tokchar, had perished there, the Mongol army carried out a vengeful massacre. Genghis Khan's daughter was granted permission to issue the execution order. She demanded the decapitation of every living creature in the city, including dogs and cats, with their skulls arranged into pyramids. The city was completely leveled. Herat suffered a similar fate. By mid-1221, nearly all of Khorasan had been transformed into a wasteland. Irrigation systems, developed over centuries, lay in ruins. The land, once the breadbasket of Central Asia, had become a desert. Many regions never recovered. This was not merely warfare, it was the methodical annihilation of a civilization. It was within this apocalyptic backdrop that a young man decided to rise and resist. Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu was born in 1199. He was the eldest son of Shah Muhammad II. However, his life was challenging from its inception. His mother was Aychak, a Turkmen slave. In the Khwarezmian society of that period, his mother's low status meant Jalal ad-Din was not considered a legitimate heir. His grandmother, the influential Queen Mother Turkan Khatun, despised him and championed another son named Uzlog Shah, born of a Cuman princess. In 1215, Shah Muhammad divided the empire among his sons. Jalal ad-Din received the southwestern territories, lands formerly belonging to the Ghurid Empire, roughly corresponding to present-day Afghanistan. While not the wealthiest region, it became his stronghold. Unlike his indecisive and wavering father, Jalal ad-Din was renowned for his courage and military prowess. He participated in at least one battle under his father's command and displayed exceptional skill. On one occasion, when Shah Muhammad nearly faced defeat in a minor skirmish with Genghis Khan's son Jochi, it was Jalal ad-Din's military acumen that saved the day. However, Genghis Khan paid little heed to this small confrontation, choosing to disregard it. This was an oversight he would recall years later. When Shah Muhammad died on a Caspian island in December 1220, he named Jalal ad-Din as his successor. Nonetheless, the empire was now merely a name. Jalal ad-Din attempted to reach Gurganj, the old capital, where the Queen Mother ruled, but she and the nobility refused to acknowledge him. They still sought to enthrone Uzlog Shah. Jalal ad-Din discovered a plot to assassinate him brewing. He was compelled to flee the city at night with only a small group of loyal guards. This was likely the most somber period of his existence. His father had passed away, his empire lay in ruins, and his family had abandoned him, all while the Mongols systematically devastated every city. Many would have preferred to flee as far as possible, yet Jalal ad-Din made a different choice. He headed east towards Afghanistan, seeking his former strongholds to reassemble his remaining forces for battle. He traversed the arid Karakum Desert, one of the world's most inhospitable regions. Along the way, he launched an assault on a small Mongol detachment near Nisa, eradicating them and killing Togachar's two brothers, who were Genghis Khan's sons-in-law. This marked the initial sign that he had no intention of yielding. By April 1221, Jalal ad-Din arrived in Ghazni, where an unexpected event unfolded. 50,000 men awaited him. These were devoted Khwarezmians, warriors who had served his father, and Afghans eager to defend their homeland. They did not form a professional army. Instead, they comprised numerous farmers, artisans, merchants, and individuals who had lost everything to the Mongols. They were refugees, survivors, people with nothing left to lose, but they possessed one crucial element: hope. Jalal ad-Din personified this hope. He was the Shah's son, courageous, and, unlike his father, he had not fled. Most importantly, he was ready to fight. A few days later, his uncle, Timur Malik, joined him with 30,000 battle-hardened soldiers. Timur Malik, an experienced general with extensive combat experience, brought not just an army, but also expertise and military discipline. To solidify their alliance, Jalal ad-Din married Timur Malik's daughter. This was more than a political marriage. It symbolized the unity of all who remained. Jalal ad-Din now commanded a force of 60,000 to 65,000 men. On paper, this appeared to be a formidable army, but in reality, it was more complex. This military comprised a loosely knit coalition of various groups: Khwarezmians loyal to the royal family, Turkic warriors led by Timur Malik, Afghan tribes defending their territories, Kalaj and Karluk peoples with their own motivations,
and thousands of refugees clamoring for revenge. They lacked uniform attire and had no collective training. Many had never even held a weapon, but they possessed something far more vital. They were fighting for survival. Jalal ad-Din wasted no time. Upon learning that the city of Kandahar was besieged by a Mongol unit, he led his troops there and, after 2 days of fighting, routed the Mongols, lifting the siege. This was the first instance a city had been rescued from Mongol clutches. News of this triumph spread, igniting a spark of hope. He then advanced north towards Ka'ana, where another city lay under siege. Mongol forces there were commanded by 2 generals, Tachik and Molga. Jalal ad-Din launched a surprise attack, defeating both armies and inflicting approximately 1,000 casualties on the Mongols. These 2 victories, though minor, held immense significance. They demonstrated that the Mongols were not invincible. Thousands of Afghans from across the region flocked to Jalal ad-Din's army, having learned of the tragic fate of Bamiyan, where Genghis Khan's grandson was killed and the entire city massacred. They realized that if they did not fight, they would perish, making death in battle a preferable option. Reports of Jalal ad-Din's victories reached Genghis Khan as he was besieging the city of Taloqan. Initially, he dismissed them as insignificant skirmishes involving detachments operating far from his main command. However, when he was informed that Jalal ad-Din was gathering a substantial force and moving towards Parwan, near Kabul, Genghis Khan decided it was time to act. He could not permit this threat to escalate. Nevertheless, unwilling to interrupt his northern campaign, he dispatched his adopted son, Shigi Kutuku, with a contingent of 30,000 to 50,000 warriors to resolve the issue. Shigi Kutuku was not an incompetent commander. He served as the Chief Justice of the Mongol Empire and was intelligent and loyal. However, he lacked experience leading large army formations in decisive battles, and his opponent was far from an ordinary adversary. Jalal ad-Din meticulously selected the battleground, the Parwan Valley, approximately 50 miles north of Kabul. In the autumn of 1221, the 2 armies converged. On one side stood a seemingly invincible war machine that had ravaged half the world. On the other, a group of refugees led by a 22-year-old youth. No one believed in the refugees' success, but history sometimes delivers surprises. The Parwan Valley was chosen deliberately by Jalal ad-Din. It was a narrow valley, snaking between the Hindu Kush mountain ranges, with its width sometimes only a few hundred meters. High ridges and rocky, uneven terrain rose on both sides. Behind lay mountain passes leading back to Kabul and Ghazni, escape routes if necessary. Why was this landscape so crucial? Because it negated the Mongols' primary advantage, their ability to maneuver and employ outflanking tactics. For their tactics of encircling foes from all angles and executing feigned retreats, Mongol cavalry needed vast open spaces. However, the narrow confines of the valley rendered such maneuvers impossible. They were compelled into a head-on confrontation, a fighting style wholly unfamiliar to them. Additionally, the uneven, rocky terrain hindered their archers' ability to fire accurately from horseback. Their mounts also struggled to maintain footing on such treacherous ground. This situation underscored a simple yet crucial military lesson: never engage the enemy on unfamiliar territory. Jalal ad-Din shrewdly transformed the Pavon Valley into his stronghold. By September, as both armies braced for engagement, Jalal ad-Din recognized this as his pivotal moment. A victory here could ignite widespread resistance across the empire. Defeat would spell ultimate ruin. Yet, his choice was made: to die gloriously in battle rather than live in subjugation. The stage was thus set for one of history's most notable clashes. Jalal ad-Din selected the Pavon Valley with deliberate precision. It was a constricted gorge snugly situated between the Hindu Kush ranges, barely a few hundred meters wide in places. Towering ridges and jagged rocky outcrops defined both sides. Behind lay mountain trails leading back to Kabul and Ghazni, offering potential escape routes if needed. This topography was critical because it entirely negated the Mongols' primary advantages, their mobility and their mastery of encirclement. Mongol cavalry relied on expansive terrain for maneuvering, flanking adversaries, and executing their renowned feigned retreats.
But within this tight valley, none of their typical tactics could be deployed. They were forced into a direct engagement, precisely the scenario they sought to avoid. Furthermore, the stony, uneven ground made it virtually impossible for their archers to deliver precise shots from horseback. Their horses stumbled and lost balance on the treacherous surface. This exemplified a fundamental principle of military strategy. Force your enemy to fight on ground that favors you, not them. Jalal ad-Din expertly turned the Pavone Valley into his defensive bastion. He strategically positioned his army to maximize the terrain's benefits. At the core, he personally commanded 5,000 elite warriors, including 700 of his royal guard. This formidable force stood ready to reinforce any point under pressure. The left flank, comprising Afghan warriors, occupied a ridge extending directly to the river, an excellent defensive position. With elevation on one side and water on the other, flippant encirclement was nearly impossible. Turkic warriors, led by Timur Malik and his uncle Amin Malik, secured the right flank. These were highly seasoned fighters, capable of swift maneuvers if necessary. Infantry units were deployed on the elevated areas surrounding the valley, poised to unleash arrows and stones upon any enemy entering the gorge. It was a formidable defensive alignment. Jalal ad-Din understood he couldn't beat the Mongols in mobile warfare, so he compelled them into a fight they wished to avoid. In September 1221, Shigi Kutuku arrived with his forces. Historical accounts vary on the precise numbers, with Juvayni reporting 30,000, Juzjani 45,000, and Ibn Abdullah al-Umari claiming 70,000. The actual strength likely ranged from 30,000 to 40,000, still a formidable force. Upon seeing Jalal ad-Din's army arrayed in the valley, Shigi Kutuku immediately recognized it as a terrain trap. However, he faced immense pressure. Retreating without a fight would be seen as cowardice in Mongol culture. Moreover, Genghis Khan had specifically tasked him with annihilating Jalal ad-Din. Unable to return empty-handed, he decided to attack. The battle commenced with a Mongol reconnaissance in force. They sent a cavalry detachment into the valley to probe the enemy's reaction. Jalal ad-Din played along, keeping his troops in position, allowing his archers just enough freedom to rebuff the probing attack. Shigi Kutuku then intensified his assault, sending larger contingents deeper into the valley. His objective was to draw Jalal ad-Din's army out of their defensive strongholds so they could be encircled. Yet, Jalal ad-Din held firm. Instead, as the Mongol forces penetrated further, he signaled for attacks from both wings. The Turkic cavalry on the right flank charged downhill, hitting the Mongols' flank. Simultaneously, the Afghan warriors from the left high ground also attacked. The infantry from the surrounding heights rained down arrows and stones. The Mongol troops found themselves in a perilous situation. In the confined space, they couldn't deploy their standard formations. Their horses stumbled on the rocky terrain, and their archers couldn't shoot accurately when their mounts lost balance. Crucially, they were being assailed from multiple directions in a constricted area. The very tactic they usually inflicted upon others was now being used against them. After several hours of fierce combat, Shigi Kutuk issued a command for a retreat. The initial day concluded without a decisive advantage for either side. Nevertheless, the morale within Jalal ad-Din's forces soared. They had repelled the Mongols. That evening, both armies prepared for the following day. Shigi Kutuk convened his officers to deliberate on tactics. He recognized that a head-on engagement in this valley would not secure them victory. The strategy for the second day involved employing the renowned Mongol tactic of a feigned retreat. Their plan was to launch an attack, then feign panic and flee. They hoped Jalal ad-Din's troops would become overzealous and pursue them, abandoning their defensive positions, at which point ambush units would encircle and annihilate them. This maneuver had succeeded countless times. It demanded unwavering discipline from the warriors. The retreat had to be orderly, devoid of panic. Opponents invariably fell for this deception, driven by the inherent human psychology of wanting to chase a fleeing enemy. Meanwhile, Jalal ad-Din was not idle. He understood that the Mongols would intensify their offensive the next day. The Sultan was aware of their tactic of feigned retreat. Not being naive, he issued directives to his commanders. No one is to abandon their position without my command. If the Mongols retreat, do not pursue them. Maintain formation. At dawn on the second day, Shigi Kutuk launched a full-scale assault. No more reconnaissance skirmishes. Thousands of Mongol horsemen surged into the valley from all directions, bellowing war cries and unleashing arrows. The thunder of thousands of hooves on the stony terrain must have been terrifying. This was the very war machine that had razed hundreds of cities and empires. Yet, Jalal ad-Din's forces held firm. They maintained their positions. Infantrymen rained arrows on the Mongols from elevated ground. Cavalry on the flanks poised for a counterattack. Shigi Kutuk pressed relentlessly, continuously bringing up reinforcements. He focused on Jalal ad-Din's left flank, where Afghan warriors were holding a ridge. If he could breach this line, he might encircle the entire Khwarezmian army. But the Afghan warriors fought with the desperate courage of people defending their homeland. They understood that defeat meant death not only for them, but also for their families. They held their ground despite continuous waves of Mongol assaults. On the right flank, even Ogedei, one of Genghis Khan's sons, who commanded a portion of the Mongol forces, was repelled by a fierce counterattack led by Timur Malik. After several hours of inconclusive fighting, Shigi Kutuk implemented his contingency plan, the feigned retreat. Suddenly, Mongol units began to turn their horses and withdraw from the valley, creating the illusion of panic. Some cast aside their weapons to hasten their escape. This was the most critical juncture for Jalal ad-Din's army. Many, especially the younger, inexperienced fighters, were eager to give chase. It seemed like an opportunity to crush the adversary, but Jalal ad-Din bellowed, "Hold your position, it's a trap." Timur Malik and other veteran commanders likewise kept their units under strict control. Discipline prevailed. No one abandoned their defensive positions. Shigi Kutuk waited, hoping the Khwarezmians would pursue, but they did not stir. The tactic had failed. Now it was Jalal ad-Din's turn. After the Mongols failed to lure him out, they were compelled to attack once more. But this time, their morale was shaken, their strategy had misfired, and they had been fighting all day on unfavorable terrain. Jalal ad-Din perceived an opening. He ordered a controlled counterattack, not a chaotic chase, but a synchronized offensive. Turkic cavalry from both flanks simultaneously charged downward, trapping the Mongol forces in the center of the valley. Infantry from the heights maintained a barrage of arrows. Jalal ad-Din personally led the royal guard forward in the center. According to An-Nasawi, Jalal ad-Din's personal historian, the Sultan even fought his way to Shigi Kutuk's position, forcing him to fall back. The Mongol army started to falter. They were unaccustomed to retreat. They were unaccustomed to fighting in such confined spaces. And most significantly, they began to doubt their capacity to win. Doubt led to indecision. Indecision created gaps in their ranks, and these breaches were mercilessly exploited by Jalal ad-Din. By the close of the second day, the Mongol army commenced a genuine retreat. This time, it was not a deception. Shigi Kutuk realized that victory under such circumstances was impossible. He commanded an organized withdrawal from the valley. However, an organized retreat in a constricted area under attack is exceedingly difficult. The withdrawal devolved into a rout. The rout descended into pandemonium. Jalal ad-Din's forces pursued, eliminating stragglers. Some Mongol soldiers attempted to cross the river to escape, but the current swept them away, and they drowned. As the sun set, the plain of Parwan was littered with corpses. Estimates suggest that between 1,000 and 3,000 Mongols perished, marking their largest loss in the entire Central Asian campaign. Shigi Kutuk survived, but he had to report back to Genghis Khan. This was one of the most arduous moments of his life. That night, in Jalal ad-Din's camp, everyone celebrated. They had accomplished the inconceivable. This assembly of refugees, farmers, and makeshift warriors vanquished the seemingly invincible forces of Genghis Khan. Jalal ad-Din executed the Mongol captives and then distributed their weaponry and armor among his own troops as spoils of war. This was a symbolic act, proclaiming, "We can defeat them, and we will utilize their own armaments to persist in this struggle." News of this victory quickly spread, sending shockwaves across the region. Rebellions erupted in Merv, Kush, and Palawar, leading to the recapture of the cities. In Herat, the populace rose up, overthrowing their Mongol overlords. Mongol garrisons in Bukhara faced attacks. Muhammad Marani, a leader of the resistance, twice raided Genghis Khan's encampment in Bagna, returning victorious with plunder each time. The triumph at Parwan shattered the myth of Mongol invincibility, demonstrating their vulnerability and instilling hope in millions living under their dominion. According to Ibn al-Athir, following this monumental victory, Jalal ad-Din sent a defiant message to Genghis Khan. "Where do you wish to engage in battle? Inform me so I can bring my army there." This was the most direct challenge Genghis Khan had ever received from an adversary. However, the jubilation of victory proved fleeting. That very night, amidst the celebrations, the seeds of future calamity were inadvertently sown. As evening fell after the festivities, the army commanders began dividing the spoils. This was standard practice after any battle, entitling the victors to their share. But a conflict arose concerning a rare and magnificent white Mongol horse. In nomadic culture, horses were not merely transportation, but symbols of status and honor. Two factions desired this particular horse: the Turkic warriors led by Timalik and the Afghan tribes under Saif al-Din Guri. Jalal ad-Din attempted to mediate, proposing peaceful resolutions, but passions were already inflamed. Ultimately, the dispute transcended the horse itself. It became about who had contributed more to the victory, about honor and respect. This friction highlighted deep-seated tensions within the fragile coalition. The argument escalated into a quarrel, then a skirmish, and before anyone could intervene, someone was injured. Saif al-Din Guri, an influential Afghan leader, felt slighted. He declared that the Afghans were not being shown due deference and made a fateful decision. He would withdraw his forces. The following morning, Jalal ad-Din discovered that nearly half of his army had vanished. Saif al-Din Guri had departed with the majority of the Afghan warriors, approximately 30,000 men. Their departure was not solely due to the horse. Deeper anxieties played a role, particularly the fear of retribution. They understood that Genghis Khan would not overlook this defeat. He would return with a far larger army, and a brutal massacre would ensue. Many Afghans desired to return home and protect their families rather than continue fighting. A lack of trust also plagued this alliance. Khwarezm and Afghanistan did not share a long history of cooperation. They were allies by circumstance, not by shared history or mutual confidence. Their objectives also diverged. Jalal ad-Din aimed to restore the Khwarezmian Empire, whereas many Afghans merely wished to defend their homelands. They cared little for recapturing Samarkand or Bukhara. Jalal ad-Din tried to persuade them to stay, warning that they would be safer together. But Saif al-Din refused to listen. He led his troops away, and many others followed suit. Overnight, the army plummeted from 60,000 to roughly 30,000 soldiers. More detrimental than the numerical reduction was the plummeting morale. Those who remained felt betrayed. They questioned, "If others are fleeing, perhaps I should too?" Jalal ad-Din faced a dilemma with no favorable solution. Option 1. Continue northward, attempting to reclaim the rebellious cities, such as Merv and Herat, and re-establish the empire. Yet, with only 30,000 men and Genghis Khan's impending return, this bordered on suicide. Option 2. Retreat to Ghazni for defense, assemble more troops, reinforce defenses, and prepare for a Mongol counterattack. However, Ghazni was not an impregnable fortress, and a protracted siege would only lead to defeat. Option 3. Withdraw to India, seeking refuge in the Delhi Sultanate, regroup, and potentially return later. This path seemed the safest, but each option presented its own challenges. Crucially, he could not make this decision alone. He needed the consensus of his remaining commanders. After their council, the decision was made. They would return to Ghazni, gather more men, and then, if necessary, advance into India. No one wished to abandon the fight immediately, but they were also not so naive as to believe they could defeat the entire Mongol Empire with only 30,000 men. When news of the defeat at Parwan reached Genghis Khan in Talas, his reaction was furious. He summoned Shigi Kutuku and heard his report.
Some historians maintain that he did not punish Shigi. Despite the loss, he acknowledged the skillful tactics and challenging terrain chosen by Jalal ad-Din. Nevertheless, he was exceedingly enraged. Having made up his mind, Genghis Khan resolved to personally lead his forces to confront Jalal ad-Din. This was no longer a task to delegate. It struck at the core of his personal honor. He amassed a fighting force of at least 50,000, potentially more, and embarked on a southward campaign. This march represented one of the swiftest movements ever undertaken by the Mongols, as they traversed the treacherous mountain passes of the Hindu Kush, some of which posed extreme dangers. During this period, in September 1221, his beloved grandson Mudagen was killed in Bamyan by a poisoned arrow. This inflicted an immense personal loss upon Genghis Khan.
In keeping with tradition, he commanded the massacre of Bamyan's entire populace and the city's utter destruction, ensuring its permanent desolation. The convergence of military defeat at Parwan and the personal tragedy at Bamyan hardened Genghis Khan even further, making him more ruthless. His objective transcended merely defeating Jalal ad-Din. He sought the complete annihilation of any who dared to resist. Jalal ad-Din guided his remaining 30,000 troops toward Ghazni. However, disquieting news reached him en route. Genghis Khan was rapidly advancing southward with an immense army, and he wasn't alone. Tolui was also leading a detachment from the west after concluding the slaughter in Khorasan. Jalal ad-Din grasped that Ghazni was indefensible. Should they be besieged there, they would perish like trapped vermin. Their only recourse was to press eastward towards the Indus River and from there into India. Yet, a grave complication emerged.
His army wasn't solely composed of 30,000 warriors. Accompanying them were thousands, possibly tens of thousands of refugees, women, children, the elderly, and the soldiers' families. They couldn't abandon these individuals, but moving with such a colossal group would be exceedingly slow, and speed was precisely what they needed. The situation appeared hopeless. To remain meant certain death. To flee without the refugees might save the army, but would entail forsaking their families and people. To flee with the refugees meant sluggish progress and the risk of being overtaken. Jalal ad-Din chose a third path: to attempt to escape with everyone, cognizant that the odds of success were exceedingly slim. This decision stemmed from honor and loyalty to his people, rather than purely rational military calculation. Perhaps it was this very choice that cemented his heroic status in historical memory, though it also culminated in a final tragedy. In late September or early October 1221, Jalal ad-Din departed with 30,000 warriors and an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 refugees. Some historians cite several thousand refugees, but the actual number was likely considerably higher. They proceeded eastward toward the Indus River. The journey from Ghazni to the Indus spanned approximately 400 kilometers through rugged, mountainous terrain. Under normal circumstances, an army could cover this distance in 2 to 3 weeks. But these conditions were far from ordinary. They had to move with women, children, and the elderly. They needed to carry food, water, and their possessions. They couldn't move quickly, and behind them, Genghis Khan pursued with 50,000 cavalrymen, one of the most mobile forces the world had ever witnessed. Along the route, the column encountered numerous challenges. The terrain required them to traverse perilous mountain trails winding through the Hindu Kush foothills. Many sections were narrow, barely wide enough for a single person. In such places, if attacked, there was no space to defend or retreat. The weather, characteristic of late autumn, brought cold to the high altitudes. Many lacked suitable warm clothing, leading to illness among children and the elderly. Regarding food, the daily needs of tens of thousands were immense. They had to forage en route, but the mountainous regions offered scarce provisions, leading some to experience hunger. Morale plummeted as everyone knew the Mongols were in pursuit. Fear spread, and some desired to abandon the column and seek individual survival. Jalal ad-Din had to constantly encourage them, emphasizing that only together did they stand a chance, and make painful decisions along the way. Some individuals simply could not continue. The elderly were too frail to proceed, and the sick were unable to move. Parents faced agonizing choices: abandon loved ones or slow their pace, risking the entire column being overtaken. There were no correct answers, only tormenting dilemmas. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan faced none of these issues. His army consisted of professional warriors accustomed to long, swift movements. They possessed ample provisions, spare horses, and no concerns for refugees. With each passing day, the distance between the two forces dwindled. Each morning, upon waking, Jalal ad-Din would look back and see dust clouds in the distance, telltale signs of the approaching army. He understood they wouldn't reach the Indus River before being overtaken by the Mongols. Yet, if they could draw closer to the river, a slim chance of crossing might emerge before being completely surrounded. Minor skirmishes punctuated the journey, with Jalal ad-Din's rearguard constantly battling the Mongol vanguard to buy the main contingent time to press onward. Numerous brave soldiers sacrificed their lives in these clashes. By late November 1221, Jalal ad-Din's column reached the banks of the Indus River, near modern-day Kalabagh in Pakistan. Yet, reached is too optimistic a word. The Mongol forces had chased them to the river, encircling them from 3 directions. At this point, the Indus River was wide and flowed swiftly. During this season, recent rains caused high water levels and a strong current. In many places, the depth reached approximately 20 feet. There were no bridges or ferries, and no time to construct rafts. Jalal ad-Din surveyed the scene. Ahead lay the river. Behind and to the sides, Genghis Khan's encirclement. There was no path for retreat. He watched as the Mongol troops prepared for their final assault. They were in no hurry, knowing their quarry had nowhere to go. They had ample time to orchestrate a perfect attack, a complete massacre. Among the Mongol ranks, Genghis Khan himself sat atop a white horse, the man who had conquered much of the known world, undefeated in battles he personally commanded. That night, November 23, 1221, no jubilation, like the one after Parwan, filled Jalal ad-Din's camp. Only silence and dread prevailed. Everyone understood that the next day could be their last. Parents embraced their children, spouses held hands tightly, and warriors, with trembling fingers, readied their weapons. Jalal ad-Din summoned his commanders. Tim Malik, his loyal uncle, was still there, along with Amin Malik, another uncle. Other courageous individuals who had followed him since his execution were also present. Brothers, Jalal ad-Din addressed them. Historians assert he delivered a brief yet profoundly emotional speech. Tomorrow, we face the mightiest empire ever to exist. They outnumber us 2 to 1. They surpass us in every aspect, and we have no escape route. Many will claim we have failed, that the battle is lost, that we should surrender and beg for mercy. But I tell you, we have journeyed so far. We defeated them once at Parwan. We proved they are not invincible. Perhaps tomorrow we will fall, but we will die as free warriors, not as slaves. We will die defending our loved ones, not kneeling and pleading for our lives. And if it is Allah's will, perhaps we will survive. Perhaps a miracle will occur. But whether we live or die, our names will endure. People will remember us, those who dared to defy Genghis Khan and did not bow their heads. In the quiet of that night on the Indus's banks, these words brought a tiny comfort. Insignificant, yet enough to face the coming day. As night gave way to dawn, the camp stirred with nervous preparations. Fathers kissed their children, possibly for the last time. Warriors sharpened blades that would taste blood again before sunset. Refugees huddled together, praying to any gods they still believed in. Jalal ad-Din walked among his people. He saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. A quiet, unyielding resolve. They had come too far to surrender now. They would make the Mongols pay dearly for every life lost. On the opposite bank of the river, in the pre-dawn darkness, the campfires of the Mongols flickered. 50,000 warriors prepared to write the final chapter of the Khwarezmian Empire. But history, as it often does, had another surprise in store, another moment that would echo across centuries, another act of courage so profound that even the greatest conqueror in history would pause in respect. The stage was set for the Battle of the Indus, the ultimate confrontation between an unstoppable force and an unyielding spirit of resistance. With the rising sun, the two armies lined up on opposite banks of the Indus River. On one side stood the order and discipline of the Mongol Empire. On the other, the desperate hope of people with nothing left to lose. Jalal skillfully positioned his troops as best he could. The center, which he personally led, comprised 5,000 elite warriors, including 700 guardsmen. The right flank, under Amin Malik, consisted of Turkic warriors. The left flank, commanded by Timur Malik, included the remaining Afghan fighters, fortified on a small ridge descending to the river. Refugees gathered behind them by the river, some attempting to cross to the other side. He tried to utilize the constricted landscape to anchor both flanks to the river, thereby lessening the chance of encirclement. However, the terrain here was significantly broader than in the Parwan Valley. The Mongols could deploy their full might. Unlike Shihi Hutuhu at Parwan, Genghis Khan did not rush. He carefully arranged his forces. In the center, he personally commanded the reserves, ensuring Jalal could not break through. His son Chagatai led the right flank, and his son Ugedei the left. Numerous cavalry units were designated for encirclement, tasked with gradually tightening the noose. This formation was devised not for a swift triumph, but for comprehensive annihilation, ensuring no one survived. At daybreak, the Mongol forces launched their assault. Unlike Saravan, this time they possessed an overwhelming advantage in both space and numbers. Initially, Jalal Mangburni's troops fought with courage. The left flank held its position on the ridge. Despite Genghis Khan's relentless reinforcement, they had learned from Saravan the crucial importance of maintaining elevated ground. On the right flank, Amin Malik also engaged fiercely, even pushing Ugedei back in the early stages. Jalal Mangburni, in the center, spearheaded counterattacks. According to al-Nasawi, possibly with some embellishment, he even drew near to Genghis Khan, compelling the Khan to briefly retreat. However, these heroic moments could not alter the harsh mathematical reality. 30,000 versus 50,000, with no escape route and unfavorable terrain. Genghis Khan, recognizing the strength of Jalal Mangburni's left flank on the ridge, dispatched General Balunin with an elite 10,000-strong Tumen to ascend behind the ridge and attack from above. This was no simple task, climbing mountains with weaponry and armor, then launching an assault downhill across rugged terrain. Yet Mongol units were trained for such intricate operations. When Balunin emerged on the left, the Afghan warriors realized they were encircled. Panic erupted among them. Their formation wavered. Jalal Mangburni, perceiving the danger, led his personal guard in a charge against the central Mongol detachment, attempting to carve an escape corridor. In this brutal melee, his loyal and brave uncle, Timur Malik, perished. With the demise of his uncle and the encirclement of the left flank, the defense began to crumble. The Mongols tightened their grip from three sides, driving Jalal Mangburni's forces toward the river. The scene devolved into utter chaos. Warriors struggled to hold their ground. Refugees desperately tried to cross the river. Many drowned in the raging currents. Others were slain on the banks. Jalal Mangburni grasped that the battle was lost. Victory was unattainable. The only remaining choice was how to face death. Amidst this pandemonium, with his family captured, his army disintegrating, and thousands perishing, Jalal Mangburni made a decision. On his armored steed, he galloped to the riverbank. Before him stood a cliff, 20 to 25 feet high, plunging steeply into the turbulent waters of the Indus. By all accounts, this meant certain death. A leap in heavy armor guaranteed instant submersion, but staying meant the same end, only more ignominious. Thus, Jalal Mangburni spurred his horse and plunged from the cliff into the river. Horse and rider soared through the air for a few seconds that felt like an eternity, then submerged with a powerful splash. Genghis Khan observed the battle from afar. Witnessing this act, he uttered words to his sons that became legendary. Such is the kind of son a father should desire. Then, in accordance with custom, he instructed his archers not to shoot at Jalal-ad-Din Mangburni, a gesture symbolizing respect for an enemy's bravery. Jalal-ad-Din Mangburni surfaced, shed some of his armor, and began swimming across the river. The strong current pulled him downstream, but he fought with all his might to reach the opposite bank. Although we know the outcome, at that moment, no one could be certain of his survival. It was an almost unbelievable act of both courage and desperation. On that riverbank, the massacre persisted. Mongol forces showed no mercy. The remnants of the army were annihilated. Thousands of refugees, women, children, and the elderly were mercilessly slaughtered. Jalal-ad-Din Mangburni's family was taken captive. All possessions, treasures, everything that remained of the Khwarezmian Empire fell into the hands of the Mongols. Estimates suggest that between 20,000 and 30,000 lives may have been lost in this battle and the subsequent carnage. The precise number will never be known, but it was undoubtedly one of history's greatest wartime catastrophes. When silence finally descended, the banks of the Indus were stained with blood. Genghis Khan had secured his ultimate triumph. The Khwarezmian Empire officially ceased to exist, but one man had crossed the river, and his story was not yet complete. Jalal-ad-Din Mangburni survived the river crossing, but he was a completely broken man. He had lost his family, army, empire, everything. He sought refuge with Sultan Iltutmish of Delhi. However, Iltutmish refused. The Sultan was unwilling to risk confrontation with the Mongols. This was a pragmatic, though also cruel, decision. Jalal-ad-Din Mangburni was forced to establish a small base in Punjab and Sindh. For 3 years, he raided cities, assembled new troops, and lived as a warlord. In 1224, after Genghis Khan departed the region to resume war with the Jin and Western Shah, Jalal-ad-Din Mangburni decided to return to Persia. He gathered a new army and even achieved some successes. He seized territories in Persia and the Caucasus. For several years, it seemed he might be able to rebuild a scaled-down version of his father's empire. Yet, he never amassed sufficient power to genuinely challenge the Mongols. Moreover, he acquired many new adversaries: the Seljuk Empire, the Ayyubids, and local rulers. In 1230, he was defeated by Sultan Kaikubad I of the Seljuks at the Battle of Yasichimen. In 1231, while seeking refuge in the mountains of Diyarbakir, a Kurd, possibly a bandit or an assassin, ended his life. Jalal ad-Din passed away at the age of 32 in the highlands, far from his loved ones and homeland. Yet, he departed as an unyielding, independent warrior. So, what was the bigger picture here? Jalal ad-Din's efforts ultimately failed. The Khwarezmian Empire was completely annihilated. Millions perished. Khorasan never fully recovered. Genghis Khan relentlessly pursued his conquests, culminating in the largest empire humanity has ever witnessed. Nevertheless, Jalal ad-Din left behind something profound: hope. The Battle of Indus demonstrated that the Mongols weren't invincible. It proved that with sound tactics, favorable terrain, and courage, even a smaller force could triumph. Jalal ad-Din's narrative motivated many others to resist the Mongols. In Vietnam, Tran Hung Dao meticulously studied and learned from the conflicts against the Mongols. The Mamluks in Egypt adapted similar strategies, successfully defeating the Mongols in 1260. Most importantly, this account highlights the essence of human bravery. Sometimes, victory isn't about the final outcome. Victory is the resolve to stand up when everyone else has surrendered. Victory is the decision to keep fighting when all logic dictates giving up. The saga of Jalal ad-Din and the 60,000 refugees offers invaluable lessons in leadership. A true leader isn't always the one who consistently prevails. A genuine leader is someone who champions their people, even when defeat seems unavoidable. Jalal ad-Din possessed the option to abandon the refugees and save himself, greatly increasing his survival chances. But he chose not to. This story also provides tactical insights. The landscape can level the playing field between a weaker and stronger army. The Battle of Parwan illustrated how understanding and utilizing the natural environment can neutralize an opponent's numerical or professional superiority. Numerous smaller armies throughout history have successfully applied this lesson. It also underscores the intricate nature of history. There are no individuals who are entirely good or entirely evil. Genghis Khan was a brutal conqueror, yet he respected the bravery of his adversaries. Jalal ad-Din was celebrated as a hero of resistance, but he himself committed mass atrocities. History, like people, is multifaceted. This narrative emphasizes the significance of resistance. Even when the conclusion is predetermined, the act of standing against adversity holds weight. It serves as an inspiration for others. It proves that the human spirit cannot be entirely broken. And sometimes, this unpredictably alters the course of history. We might not face a Mongol empire, but each of us encounters our own Mongol empires. These are seemingly insurmountable challenges, situations where logic screams surrender. Jalal ad-Din's tale reminds us that at times, the effort itself is more crucial than the end result. Even in defeat, how we lose matters. Courage inspires those around us in immeasurable ways. So, the next time you confront a seemingly impossible task, remember the 22-year-old defiant youth who dared to challenge the world's greatest empire with an army of refugees. Recall his victory at Parwan. And though he ultimately lost, his name and story endure through the centuries. If this video offered a fresh perspective on history, inspired you, or simply delivered a compelling narrative, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments on Jalal ad-Din's decision not to abandon the refugees, even knowing it would impede his army. Was it the right choice or a strategic error? And don't forget to share this video so more people can learn from it.